Objective 5. Interpret multiple bar graphs. A multiple bar graph is a graph that has two or more bars for each category of the variable and compares two or more different populations. For example, in 1989, 800 fathers who stayed at home were surveyed about why they stayed at home. A similar survey was carried out in 2012, in which they surveyed 900 fathers. The fathers' responses and the relative frequencies are described by the multiple bar graph below for both years. So it's a relative frequency, so the vertical axis is in a proportion or a percentage, 0.20, 0.40, 0.60. In our horizontal, we have caring for home family for one category, unable to work for another category, ill or disabled for another category, and in school or retired or other for the final category. Now, we notice that in the blue, that represents the year of 1989. And for 2012, that is the orange color of the rectangles. And at the top of each of the rectangles are listed the proportion for each. So, for unable to work, in 1989, it was 0.15. In 2012, it is 0.23. Now again, these are also percentages. So 0.15 is the same thing as 15%. 0.23 is the same thing as 23%. So let's answer part A. What percentage of fathers in the 2012 study stayed at home because they were unable to find work? So if we look at this unable to find work, and in 2012 is in this category here, it is 0.23, which is the proportion. We want to turn it into a percentage, so by moving it over two places, it gives us 23%. Part B, how many fathers in 1989 stayed at home because they were unable to find work? Well, first and foremost, in 1989, we need to look at the blue, and we want to look at the category where they're unable to find work. So unable to find work, we see that the proportion is 0.15. Now, we need to figure out how many fathers in 1989 stayed at home. Well, we also need to use the amount of the fathers who were sampled in 1989, and that was 800. So we need to find out what is 0.15 or 15% of that 800. So 0.15 times 800 tells us that 120 out of the fathers in 1989 stayed at home because they were unable to find work. Part C, how many fathers in 2012 stayed at home because they were in school? So let's take a look at the category where it says stayed at home because they were in school. So here it is in school. And we can see that in 2012, we have 0.22. So 0.22 represents the proportion. And then recall that in 2012, there were 900 fathers that were surveyed. So we're going to take 0.22 or 22% of 900. So 0.22 times 900 tells us that there were 198 fathers in 2012 that stayed at home because they were in school. Part D, it says, from inspecting the multiple bar graph, a student concludes that 56% of all fathers in 1989 stayed at home because they were ill or disabled. Then what would you tell the student? So if we take a look up here, it says ill or disabled, it says 0.56 in 1989, which represents 56%. But it's saying that of all fathers in 1989, this would be incorrect, since the 56% pertains to the 800 fathers surveyed. So the difference between all and 800 is big here. So that tells us that this is incorrect. Now, if this would have said of the 800 fathers in 1989, then this statement would have been correct.